I'm making you both my students from this day forward.
Yeah! Here goes!
All right, here Goku!
I can't let you hurt people. Unreal.
My turn. Awesome! All right!
No, wait a second.
I just love fighting.
There have been few franchises that have lasted with me since childhood. A few I can name off the top of my head would be Godzilla, Looney Tunes, and the Dragon Ball franchise is up there too. It has been one of my long obsessions that has reflected in everything from watching on TV to playing video games to buying unauthorized magazines to buying DVDs to watching on streaming. And I just recently started reading the manga. What is it that draws me in so much? My heart has been calling for me to talk about this magical series. I ain't gonna do any deep analysis or anything, I just want to talk about the awe-inspiring, funny, weird, tragic, and just plain zany moments from Dragon Ball. As far back as I can remember, I first heard of Dragon Ball Z around the year 1999, as I watched Cartoon Network a lot, and would often see Toonami promos. Yet, I didn't watch too much Toonami at the time. However, I'd say around 2001 was when I started to get into it. My memory is slightly fuzzy, but I believe the first arc that I was seeing was the Saiyan Saga. I had never seen such intense action before in a cartoon. The closest I would say at the time was maybe Batman the Animated Series, but never this fast and with this much firepower. Every hit so impactful. Every blast so catastrophic. Dodges, counters, last-minute desperate feats of strength. It was the beginning of my love and appreciation for martial arts, and my big exposure to the action genre. It was then I knew I was hooked. This was where it all started. That constant need to get home from school every day to catch Toonami in time to watch Dragon Ball Z. Slowly but surely, as I watched more of the episodes, I got to learn the names of the characters and got a feel for what they were all about. My favorites tended to be Goku, because he was always the strongest, and seeing him lose his shirt did offer some awakenings for me. I also really liked Piccolo. As a kid, he just felt like the coolest to me, and he had all the sickest powers. Shame he didn't use them a whole lot, but they were still awesome to see and planted seeds for my childhood imagination whenever inventing fights in my head. Some of my other favorites were Krillin, Tien, Yamcha. I didn't remember liking Vegeta too much because he was always so dang mean. Speaking of which, that Saiyan Saga was the definition of keeping me glued to my TV as a kid. Each episode ending had something to keep me anticipating what was to come next, but also ticked me off as I had to slowly watch the other characters be slaughtered like lambs while we wait for Goku to show up. But man, was it so constantly tense and exciting to watch. Even in the hindsight of seeing so many of the characters I was learning to love die, those moments of hope when the fighters landed a successful attack, the dust settling was never in their favor. Looking back, it was a good lesson in storytelling. Always leave your potential audience with a reason to keep coming back and seeing how the story goes. It's a trope I've seen used constantly since, and predates Dragon Ball, going back to old film serials and newspaper comics. But this was my first big exposure to this method of pacing. Also, might be as good a time as any to bring it up here. Dragon Ball Z was the first time I noticed a different kind of feeling. When you have a series of muscle-buff dudes fighting each other, getting all sweaty, breathing heavily, and getting their clothes torn off, there I was, a little lad, watching all this go down, seeing all that exposed skin and muscle. Hey, I think I like this. But for real, Dragon Ball Z was the beginning of awakenings for me and my sexuality. Akira Toriyama made me gay. Mother was right. Anime was gonna turn me queer. Around the same time Dragon Ball Z was airing on Toonami, so too was Dragon Ball. If memory serves me right, they began airing Dragon Ball at 5 PM and Dragon Ball Z at 5:30. I started watching it when it was airing from the first episode, and I loved seeing Goku's adventures as a young lad. It was pretty surreal to see so many characters from Dragon Ball Z having more active roles in Dragon Ball, as well as seeing the origins of certain things, such as the Kamehameha and the Senzu Beans. Not to mention, Dragon Ball had more fantasy kung fu adventure aspect to it compared to Z, as well as a more lighthearted and comedic tone. I grew to find out Akira Toriyama was inspired to create Dragon Ball from the early Jackie Chan movies Drunken Master, Snake and the Eagle's Shadow, and The Fearless Hyena. Becoming a big Jackie Chan fan since getting into Dragon Ball, I can definitely see the influence of his signature kung fu comedy on the series. As I continued to watch Dragon Ball, I managed to get all the way up to the Tao Pai Pai arc. And then I got into a certain other show that was also airing at 5 o'clock every day in my area. So I stopped watching Dragon Ball as a kid and didn't ever get around to finishing it. Until a couple of years ago when I watched through the whole series in 2021. It was my first time seeing the series all the way through from start to finish. Even watching it in Japanese, as that was the only version Hulu had available. I didn't mind though. Hearing it in another language only added to the exotic and otherworldly aesthetic Dragon Ball was known for. I got to see the arcs I missed out as a kid, such as the Tien arc. I had no idea Tien was such a badass before Z happened. And seeing King Piccolo was once the biggest and most evil villain in the whole show definitely makes his face turn all the more impressive. Also, Piccolo Jr. turns into a giant when he fights Goku. What? He could do that? Why the heck didn't he ever do that when the Saiyans showed up? Probably would have made a more fair fight. But even with my new Simpsons obsession at a young age, I still kept up with Dragon Ball Z as it was airing. Just simply had to run downstairs where the DirecTV box was. Soon I found myself in the Frieza arc, who I remember thinking was a girl the first time I saw him. The fact he was voiced by a girl in the dub at the time, Linda Young, didn't help. This was when, even as a kid, I started to notice a little something about Dragon Ball that tends to be a recurring annoyance for a lot of people, myself included, that affects not only it, but anime in general. Didn't know this as a kid at the time, but Dragon Ball being based on the manga meant it was written way before I was born, and was being adapted at the same time. So animation companies had to pad out, make up scenes, and take creative liberties in order to not get too caught up with Toriyama's pace. These creative liberties resulted in whole episodes being dedicated to moments that were not canon to Toriyama's manga. Credit where it's due, the people who were making this show did a good job of sliding these episodes into the story and it coming off as seamless. There was the other common filler method, probably the most common, pacing. Moments that were briskly paced in the manga were slowed down a little bit in the series. So you'll have several moments of long pausing, screaming, flashbacks to moments you just saw, and even added extra moments of fights. This was something that was glaringly obvious as an adult, but even as a kid, I would take notice that there were plenty of episodes where there wasn't much fighting going on. Felt kinda like a cheat waiting all day at school, eager to see what was gonna happen on Dragon Ball Z late in the evening, only to have a filler episode waiting for me. Ah, dagnabbit, now I gotta try again tomorrow. However, these moments never killed my obsession with Dragon Ball Z. I was always coming home to plop myself in front of that TV to watch some kung fu fighting, energy blasting, planet crushing, monkey painting grabbing old perv action that Toonami, Toriyama, and Toei Animation had gifted to me and several other people who have been sucked into the franchise. 2003 rolled around, and that's when DBZ got popular enough in North America for Funimation to start distributing the sequel series.
Step into the Grand Tour. Step into the Grand Tour. Dragon Ball GT.
Yeah, this ain't your daddy's Dragon Ball. This is a new hit Dragon Ball. Nothing said badass and edgy at the time like rap music. Yeah, some US executives thought this action franchise about fighting monkeys from space wasn't gritty and cool enough to bring the kids in. Let's get some hip-hop in here, stat! So yeah, they did a really good job of selling this new series and drawing people in. It worked on me. I started collecting some of the VHS tapes, and I loved it just as much as anything else Dragon Ball related. But, as a kid, I didn't realize what everyone else did at the time. The series was ungodly levels of dull. And you know, that makes sense. It wasn't based off any previously written Toriyama material, as the manga had just ended, and Toriyama was barely involved with the series, only contributing character designs. So yeah, it was pretty much created to cash in on the popularity of Dragon Ball. And this all took place before it was widely distributed in North America. After watching small batches of it growing up, I did eventually try to give the series a fair chance as an adult. To its credit, it did try to bring Dragon Ball back to its adventure and comedic roots, but without Toriyama's penmanship, you can tell something is missing. And watching the Japanese version of this show, you get probably the best part of this whole series, the opening. So yeah, I tried to give the series a fair chance and see for myself what it's all about. But after 18 episodes, I couldn't keep going. While the adventure of Dragon Ball was there, it was lacking in the wonder and the world building. And the comedy was much to be desired too. Too many episodes that had little to nothing going on. I hear around the baby arc is when it starts to get somewhat good. Well, I'll take your guys' word for it, because I just couldn't make it that far. Maybe I'll finish the series someday. But for right now, I think I'll see how watching Super goes. So eventually, Cartoon Network had a rebrand in 2004 where they changed up their schedule. Toonami moved from weekday evenings to Saturday nights, and its previous time slot was taken by Maguzi. So, I lost my way to watch Dragon Ball consistently. Darn. Oh well. Didn't hurt too much as a kid because I was always finding new things to distract me. Plus, I had the Dragon Ball Z games coming out giving me my fill. But, Dragon Ball was too popular of a franchise for it not to be re-aired. And I did my best to get back into it to watch it whenever it was consistently back on. I remember the next time I saw it would have been when I believe Adult Swim started airing Dragon Ball Z Uncut at night. And it blew my mind just how bloody and adult the series felt. I had heard beforehand that Cartoon Network had to make cuts to air the series on Toonami, but I had no idea the series had such violence I wasn't used to at the time. I realized as I was getting older, Dragon Ball was getting more and more adult as well. Flash forward some years, and it was Nicktoons Network's time to throw their splat into the ring with Dragon Ball Z Kai. After years of complaining about filler, the fans were given a new version of Dragon Ball Z that cuts filler and follows the manga much more faithfully. It was awesome to see Dragon Ball Z on TV again, and I was surprised just how much it was holding up for me. I wasn't losing interest in it. If anything, I was only loving it the more I watched. It was a little jarring for me to see a lot of filler that I was used to as a kid removed in this version, but I got used to it, and I noticed this was the time when Dragon Ball Z was starting to be released on DVD. So, I was snatching up those season sets to finally see Dragon Ball Z as meant to be seen. Uncut, in chronological order, cropped as hell, what the heck Funimation, but hey, close enough. At the time, it was the best I had to finally see Dragon Ball Z all the way through, as I had missed the Android saga when it was airing on TV. So this was definitely my favorite arc of Dragon Ball Z. Considering behind the scenes it was stressful for Toriyama, as he was constantly going back and forth with his editor, who kept shooting down the ideas he had for it, forcing him to make several last-minute changes. It's honestly fascinating how well the arc turned out, and it felt like it was planned that way from the start. In hindsight, maybe that's what made the arc so engaging. There was always a sense of ever-coming danger just around the corner. Right when you think the characters had everything figured out and have the upper hand, there's always something else coming out of nowhere to stifle any songs of hope. This is also the arc where my favorite character Piccolo has probably the most badass moments in the series. Albeit, also some of his last badass moments. That doesn't stop his fight with Android 17 from being my favorite one of the whole series, though. Piccolo was also the vessel for which we're exposed to the main villain of this arc, Cell. An android who time traveled to become complete by absorbing the other androids. Oh, he also demonstrates probably the most gruesome deaths we see in the franchise as he literally drinks people from the inside. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't see this arc as a kid and only got the story from games. I probably would have been too horrified to go outside again where all the people drinking bugs are. This arc also had probably the most infuriating moment of the series involving Vegeta. At the risk of everyone on Earth, including his wife and newborn son, allowing Cell to reach his perfection so he can have a worthy opponent to fight off. Dag nab you Sans and your obsession with beating people up. I can't make a video on Dragon Ball without mentioning one of the essential souls that kept it going since the beginning, Masako Nozawa. She has been the voice of Goku since day one of the anime debuting, and she has never called in sick, never been replaced. Even when Goku became an adult, she continued to voice him. Not gonna lie, when I was watching a friend play Jump Force, I was flabbergasted hearing Goku's Japanese voice for the first time. It was just so different from what I was used to that it sounded off. However, when I started watching Dragon Ball sub shortly after, the more I heard her voicing Goku, the more I not only got used to it, she became my definitive Goku voice. She has such a playful way of voicing Goku that really complements his oafish and lighthearted nature. But when she needs to get serious as the stakes get more dangerous, she can go ham. Hearing her screaming as Goku was being crushed by Vegeta in Ozero form was painful for me to listen to. Dang, her poor lungs. So, here's to you, Masako Nozawa, in your 80s and still going strong. You are the GOAT. Dragon Ball Z was also the series that always had new movies coming out. Seemed every year after I got into it, I'd be seeing Dragon Ball Z movies on VHS in stores. I even had a couple growing up. Cooler's Revenge and The Return of Cooler. I even caught some on Toonami, recording Dead Zone off of TV. Granted, even as a kid I noticed these movies were a little shorter than the movies I was used to, but at the same time, I didn't mind. They still had all the action-y action I was obsessed with this franchise for. There's no doubt Dragon Ball is a franchise that's so ingrained in my DNA at this point that it feels a part of me. Every time I revisit it, while bringing back memories for me, it also gets better with age. Seems there's always something I'm discovering that makes me fall in love with it more. That's especially the case considering there have been so many different ways I've seen it, from the TV safe versions on Toonami, to the English dubs, to the original Japanese audio with the original music. Dragon Ball Z has been called the greatest action cartoon of all time. While it would be hard to argue against the impact it's had on anime and entertainment media in general, I think it's underselling the whole franchise when you call it that. While the action in Dragon Ball is what sells it to potential viewers, I believe what makes it so special is the philosophies and experiences you learn from it. Some of my favorite moments in Dragon Ball don't even involve action. Moments like Piccolo telling Gohan he was the only one who treated him well, to the random silly moments like Jackie Chan breaking into a song during the martial arts tournament, with Goku joining in. It's no secret Toriyama loves to draw silly and funny stuff, as Dragon Ball was inspired by Journey to the West and Jackie Chan's kung fu comedy movies, but I even see he must have been inspired by Looney Tunes with the inspirations he likes to draw on his characters. The fact Toriyama jumped into unfamiliar waters to start creating this series armed with nothing more than his inspiration and pen, but ended up creating one of the most popular franchises in the whole world is fascinating. It shows that you don't need to jump into any story with everything planned out. All you need is drive and determination. While the story has some hiccups along the way, this simple approach helps keep things straightforward and engaging. When something as mundane as another character showing up changing the stakes and leaving you feeling suspenseful as to what comes next. Not only did it inspire me as a storyteller, even as a kid, it was a building block for a lot of inspiration from me. I would set up toys in my room to stage epic multi-man battles one day, and then another day, I'd be outside running around doing kamehamehas with my hands and scattering random objects throughout my yard pretending I was finding Dragon Balls. Dragon Ball is a series that's been through several different filters since I got into it. Whether it's animation, video games, print media, the series always has a way of taking me back. Back to a time where the biggest worries I had was getting homework done. A time when make-believe villains like Frieza and Cell were the worst evil I had been exposed to, and real-life monsters didn't exist. Even in my adult life, it finds new ways to fill me with joy and wonder, knowing that, like Goku and his adventures, as long as I have my friends by my side, there's no challenge that I can't overcome. Dragon Ball is a fantastic adventure I've gone on plenty of times, and would go on many, many more.